Hello and welcome to our campfire. It's nice to see new faces and subscribers. Our first story is called The Policeman. A few years ago, I lived in a large apartment complex in the city. The building was 10 stories high and my apartment was on the 8th floor. It was a bad area with a lot of crime. I was planning to move out soon, so I never bothered to get to know any of my neighbors. One Friday night, I came home from a hard day at work and I was feeling very tired. I got into the elevator and pressed the button for my floor. When the doors opened, there was a man standing there. He was dressed in a long overcoat and his hat was pulled down low over his eyes. "Hello," I said, trying to be polite. The man didn't answer. As I got out of the elevator, he pushed past me roughly and got into the elevator and started pressing the buttons. "What a jerk," I muttered to myself. I unlocked my apartment door and went inside. I went straight to the bathroom. While I was washing my hands, I happened to glance in the mirror and noticed something strange. There was a dark red stain on the sleeve of my shirt. It looked like blood. Then I remembered the rude guy who had bumped into me at the elevator. It made me feel sick. I didn't know where the blood had come from, but I had my suspicions. I immediately locked my front door. Then I took a shower and threw the blood-stained shirt in the trash. I didn't sleep very well that night. The next day was a Saturday, and I had a date with an attractive young woman I had met. I was getting ready to leave when I heard my doorbell ring. "Who could that be?" I muttered in irritation. I was already late for my date, and I didn't want to waste more time. Peering through the peephole, I saw a policeman standing outside. "What is it?" I asked loudly through the door. "I'm sorry to disturb you, sir," he said politely. "I wanted to ask you some questions. There was a murder last night in the apartment next door to yours. I was late for my date. I didn't want to get involved." "Sorry, officer, I didn't see anything," I lied. "But you may be able to help us," said the policeman. "Did you see anybody suspicious? Can you at least open the door to talk?" "I wasn't at home last night," I lied again. "Sorry, officer, I can't help you." "You're all right, sir," the policeman responded. "Thank you for your time." He walked off down the hallway and I continued getting ready for my date. For the next few days I felt very nervous. My next-door neighbor had been murdered. The neighborhood was really unsafe. I was glad I was moving out soon. I also felt very guilty about lying to the policeman. After all, I had seen the murderer. Even though I hadn't seen his face, perhaps there was something I could have told the police that would help them catch the killer. Sometimes crimes are solved by one little detail. One morning before I went to work, I was wondering if the police had managed to solve the case. I turned on the TV and watched the news, but they didn't mention anything about the murder. When I was leaving for work, I noticed a bad smell in the hallway. It seemed to be coming from the apartment next door to mine. I had a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. I went to find the building manager and told him about the smell. When I mentioned the murder, he said there hadn't been any murder in this building. I convinced him to come back up to my floor. When he smelled the stench, he used his master key to open my neighbor's apartment. Both of us were horrified by what we found. My neighbor was on the floor, surrounded by a pool of blood. The smell was overpowering. He'd been lying there for days. The next story is called Man in the Elevator. There was a 19-year-old Korean girl named Haruko who was attending university in a large city. One night, she had to stay late in the library to finish a project, and it was almost dark by the time she returned home. Haruko lived on the 14th floor of an old apartment building. She stood in the entrance and pressed the button to call the elevator. She always hated coming home alone so late in the evening. It just didn't feel safe. When the elevator came, she stepped inside and pushed the button for her floor. Just as the doors were about to close, a handsome man came running up. The man was out of breath and put out his hand to stop the doors closing. Then, he stepped into the elevator and stood beside her. "You live on the 14th floor?" he asked, seeing the button lit up. "Yes," replied Haruko. "Oh," said the man, smiling. "I live on the 13th. As the elevator ascended, he pressed the button for 13. Through the windows in the elevator door, Haruko watched the floors go by, as they both stood in silence. She stole a few glances at the man. He certainly was handsome. She wondered if he would ever be interested in dating her. When he happened to look at her, she batted her eyelids and smiled sweetly at him. Just then, the elevator stopped at the 13th floor. The doors opened and the man stepped out. "See you later," he said. "Yes, see you," replied Haruko. As the doors of the elevator were closing behind him, the man suddenly turned around, pulled a sharp knife out of his jacket and said, in a menacing voice, "Ah, upstairs." Then, laughing like a maniac, he ran towards the staircase. The girl was terrified, but before she could do a thing, the doors shut and the elevator began to ascend. She began to panic. Desperately, she hammered the buttons with her fist, trying to get the elevator to stop, but it was no use. When it reached the 14th floor and the doors opened, the man with the knife was already standing there, waiting for her. In Korea, people say that this is a true story. The girl was found dead, stabbed to death in the elevator. People say that the worst part was not her death itself, but rather the sheer horror she experienced in between those two floors, when she was trapped in the elevator and knew she was going to die. They claim that this is the reason that all elevators now have a stop button. My name is Magda, and I'm 26 years old. I work in an office in the city. On weekends, I used to love to get away from all the hustle and bustle and take a trip to the countryside. Luckily, I have a cottage in a small village, which is located right at the edge of the forest. How I used to love to get out of the city and spend the weekend in my little cottage. Why did I stop? Well, I'll tell you. After a hard week at work, I needed a rest, so I decided to get out of town. I went home, packed my bags, threw them in the trunk, and drove off. When I arrived in the village, it was late in the evening, and I was tired from the long drive. I went straight to bed and fell asleep quickly. In the middle of the night, I was awakened by the sound of my car alarm going off. I looked out the window, but there was nobody in sight. I found my car keys, pressed the button to shut off the alarm. When the awful noise stopped, I lay down again and tried to fall back asleep. All of a sudden, the alarm went off again. I didn't feel like getting up, so I just grabbed my keys and pressed the button again. Everything was peaceful and quiet. 5 minutes later, the alarm went off a third time. Once or twice could have been an accident, but now I was wondering what was going on. Could someone be playing tricks on me in the middle of the night? I got up again and pressed the button to turn off the alarm, but this time, I didn't lay down. I stood at the curtains and watched. After a few minutes, I saw something by the light of the moon. A shadow emerged from the bushes and slowly approached the car. I could just about make out the shape. It was something tall, skinny, and black. The figure reached out with its long, thin arms and knocked on the car. The alarm went off again, and, quick as a flash, the dark figure retreated back into the bushes. At that moment, I realized what was going on and began shaking with fear. I turned off the alarm and continued to watch. The thing emerged from the bushes again and slid silently over to the gate, threw a hand through them and removed the partition holding the gates closed. I was paralyzed with fear and I couldn't move. My mind was overcome by panicked thoughts. What was it? What did it want from me? What was it doing? Would it ever go away? A shiver ran through my body, from my head down to my toes. My mouth was dry and my heart was beating fast. I was so tense. I was gritting my teeth and clenching my hands into fists. I got control of myself and ran down the stairs as fast as my legs would carry me to the ground floor. I wanted to look for something I could use to protect myself. However, just as I was about to switch on the lights, I suddenly froze in my tracks. The dark figure was at the window. It was pressed up against the glass, staring in, looking to see whether or not there was someone home. I immediately ducked down behind the sofa and peered out. That's when I realized what all these tricks with the car were for. It was trying to lure its victim outside. I could not take my eyes off its hideous face. The skin was the color of ash and covered with wrinkles. Its eyes were small, beady, and completely black. Instead of a nose, there were 2 ragged holes. It didn't have any lips, just 2 rows of sharp yellow teeth. Its breathing was so heavy and hoarse that it was misting up the window. I just knew it was not going to go away. After standing at the window for a few moments, I heard a rustling noise as it came to the front door. I watched as it tried to push its fingers through the gap under the door. The handle began to twitch wildly up and down, and then the creature emitted a chilling sound. It was not like the human voice. It was a deep, beastly growl, like an angry dog chewing on a bone. I knew that if it heard me, it would keep trying until it found a way to get into the house. I just crouched down behind the sofa, hiding in the shadows and desperately trying not to make a sound. Tears began involuntarily streaming down my face, no matter how much I tried to stop them. I could feel my pulse pounding in my temples, and I was shaking like a leaf, just waiting for it to end. I don't know how long I cowered there. I must have passed out. When I woke up and looked at the door, the creature was gone. The door was still in place and everything seemed secure. I have never been so relieved in all my life. I ran upstairs and looked out the window. It was light outside, and there was no sign of anything wrong. Taking a chance, I grabbed my keys and, without stopping to collect any of my things, I ran out to the car. I jumped in, locked the doors and drove away from the village as fast as I could. I didn't stop driving until I got back to the city. When I got back to my apartment, I turned on the radio and heard a news report. The announcer said that, in the village, the dead bodies of 2 girls had been discovered. Their corpses had been mutilated and dumped in a swamp. I guess the creature found what it was looking for.